The Carson City Mint was one of the major U.S. mints. There hasn't been that many mints in the United States, so it was quite an honor for Nevada, for Carson City, to have a U.S. mint that would be producing both gold and silver coins, some $50 million in its 23 years of history. The reason Carson City was chosen is the location. I think right being here on a level part of this valley called Eagle Valley, and being so close to the Comstock Lode, the famous mining district that was just a short distance from here, that was initially discovered in 1859 and then started to boom in 1860s. And so there were a number of people, not only in Carson, but in this region, that also wanted a mint for Nevada. And that was because of the feeling that it was costly to send the bullion off to San Francisco because that was the closest US mint there. But then in 1864, it became the state capital. So what an ideal place to put it would be in this site of a capital city of the great state of Nevada. We're in the press room where we have historic coin press #1. And I really believe this is the most important and significant press in the United States. And the reason I say it, it's been in all the major mints in the United States, the 4 major ones. It arrived, as I mentioned earlier, about 1868, 69, was the only press here for the first 5 years, and started the production in 1870. They only had the one historic press for the first 5 years. Later, they would add 2 additional ones, one bigger. This is a 200-ton press. And then they had a smaller press. So this did all of the early coins, some of the rarest coins, were minted off this press. So it has a wonderful history. Now, to operate it, they used steam. So there was a stationary steam engine out back, and they had to have a wood pile right in a lot right next to us here that's a parking lot today. But they had to use that to operate the coin press, but the other presses and things they needed to get everything prepared for the blanks to be ready to be put into the press. But at its peak, it had over 80 workers. So it was very important to the economy. That's another thing. It would provide jobs. And at its height, it was bringing in $10,000 a month into this small frontier capital city. Women were suited and were given right from the beginning a job known as an adjuster in the earlier history of the US Mint. And the adjusters were women whose job was quality control. They would be in a room. In this mint, there were only at the maximum about 17. But if you see a picture, an illustration of 1860 of the Philadelphia Mint, which was a so much bigger operation, they'd have 50 or 60 women sitting in the adjusting room. You would see from the illustrations is they would have a scale in front of them, and they could realize, oh, this is too light. There's nothing we can do to get this to meet the standard. So they would just put it in a bucket, and then it could be sent down to the smelter and then remelted and then turned in again to another coin. What happened was, after a few years later in 1878, there was some kind of malfunction. We don't know exactly what happened, but it probably scared everybody in the press room that the upper arch on the press cracked. If you can imagine, that's 6 tons of iron. And so it must have made a heck of a noise, but it was damaged in a way that the press would either have to be sent back to Philadelphia to Morgan & Orr to have it repaired. And it was just so happens that only a block from this building here was the Carson City V&T engine shop works. And after talking to the railroad officials, they said, sure, we could repair this. So they took the press, sent it over there, and they repaired it and returned it. And they did one thing that has saved the press, that why we can see it today, is you'll notice the brass builder's plaque on there. They took off Morgan & Orr and replaced it, or either ground it down and then recarved in, and they put in Virginia and Truckee Railroad Works, and the date, May of 1878. So that eventually when the mint closed here in 1893, and the presses and other equipment left here in 1899 to go to other mints, they went back east. This press ended up in Philadelphia. So once it was back in Philadelphia, people could recognize that we were operating it. It said the Carson City Mint. So it was identified clearly to the history of this institution, which was no longer a mint after it arrived in Philadelphia. It was converted at that point to electricity. And then during the Second World War, right at the end of it, they decided there was a need for the press to come out west again, and it ended up in San Francisco. And 10 years later, about 1955, they were going to modernize, and they were going to just destroy the press. They were going to sell it for scrap. And a local newspaper man that worked out of Oakland let us know about it, because he was interested in coins and knew about the significance of the press. And so that started our board and our founder, Judge Clark Guild, working to acquire this press. And so the U.S. Mint wouldn't donate it to it, but they sold it to us for $225. Incredible. This is one of the several vaults that are located within the historic Carson City Mint building here. But this one is the special one that we open every day and make sure that it's open when the public comes in. This is where we have our historic Carson City coin collection. So let me take you in there and show it to you. The rarest one for us here is this 1876 20-cent piece. And you'll notice there's 10,000 next to it. That was the mintage. That's as many as they did that year. It was only 2 years that they operated and did the 20-cent piece, from 1875 to 1876. And the reason that they even did a coin like that was, again, to aid Nevada, a great mining state. Our senator at that time, Senator Jones, was the one that pushed this. It was thought that by having other coins, like a 20-cent piece, would increase mining. And what happened was, after the first year, the second year, they realized that the coin just wasn't working. It was being mistaken for the quarter. And very similar in size, seated liberty. And the fact was, people were making that mistake all the time. So they decided to end the experiment, or minting it, the 20-cent piece. And the 10,000 that is listed there, all 10,000 were supposed to be melted down and turned into other coins. Well, somebody here at the Mint, probably the director or somebody very high up, took 18 to 20 of these 20-cent pieces and took them out of a mint bag. And those are the ones that circulate in collections around the world. Now, the interesting thing about this collection, it was put together by a man in northern Nevada. Norman Biltz was his name. He was involved in real estate and other financing and politics too. And he got interested in putting together a CC collection of coins, both the gold and silver ones. And he was so successful, he was just too short. To have 111 is to have a complete collection. And we have 109 here. So we're missing the two rarest coins, which you might wonder, when do those become available? And it was just last August in 2012 that they were up for an auction back east. A whole collection, a complete collection of the Carson City coins were auctioned off, and those two rare coins were sold. Unfortunately, we didn't and weren't able to bid on them. They're very expensive at this time. I think the dime, the rarest one, went for almost $2 million, over $1,800,000. When the mint closed in 1893, and finally a few years later they took the mint status away in 1899, you can see for years after that, all the way into the 1920s, there was always this hope that we could get the mint going again. But once all the machinery was gone, they never could get it back to where it was a U.S. mint again. One thing that people get excited about coinage is the fact of just the history associated with this mint that was only here for 23 years. And the fact of, I think another thing that I've picked up since I've become interested as the curator here at the museum is the fact that it's kind of a work of art. You know, some of the medallions and some of the coin designs have a real classic and important story to tell us about American history.